Every town on this list was built for a reason, and every one of them outlived that reason by just long enough to break your heart. A harbor, a courthouse, a steel furnace, a river full of cotton. Take the reason away, and Alabama has a way of closing the fields back over the streets until no one remembers. Here are 6 towns it happened to, and the last one is the one you won't shake. Number 6. Spectre in Elmore County. This one is stranger than the rest because it was never meant to be a town at all, and people keep showing up anyway. Spectre was built from nothing in 2003 for Tim Burton's film Big Fish, the story of a mythical Alabama place so perfect that anyone who found it lost the will to leave. Burton's crew took over Jackson Lake Island near Millbrook and raised a whole main street on it, a white church at the far end, storefronts down both sides, and an entrance where 2 poles were strung with hanging shoes. The idea being that once you arrived, you had no reason left to walk out. When the cameras stopped, the crew was meant to tear it all down, but the family that owns the island refused and told them to leave it standing. Word got around, and people began driving in from other states and countries just to see it. One man made the trip from South Florida only weeks after burying his 21-year-old son, who had died of cancer. The 2 of them had watched Big Fish together through the boy's final months, and now the father needed to stand on that street one more time. A fire took most of the original storefronts some years ago, but 7 buildings are still upright, grayed and draped in Spanish moss, and a small herd of goats has claimed the place for good. The shoes are still on the wire. Spectre was never real, and yet the grief and the love that keep finding their way to it are as real as anything else on this list. Number 5. Fort Mims in Baldwin County. There is a rebuilt wooden fort on the Tensaw River that Alabamians have driven past 100 times without slowing down, and what happened behind its walls on a single August afternoon in 1813 redrew the map of the entire American South. Fort Mims was never much more than a stockade, a wooden fence around a house and a few outbuildings, half an acre inside. That summer, with the standoff between settlers and the Red Stick faction of the Creek Nation coming to a head, close to 600 men, women, and children packed themselves inside it for safety. The Red Sticks struck on the 30th of August, and the fighting ran for 5 hours. By the end, more than 500 people within those walls were dead, the heaviest loss of civilian American life in any native attack in the country's history. Word reached Andrew Jackson in Nashville within weeks, and the war that followed broke the Creek Nation and ended in the Treaty of Fort Jackson, which stripped the Creek of 23 million acres, close to half of present-day Alabama and Georgia, and that single seizure ran straight downhill into the Trail of Tears. All of it traces back to 5 hours at a half-acre stockade most people never bother to stop and see. Number 4. Ensley in Jefferson County. Drive west on Interstate 20 through Birmingham, and you cannot miss them. The blast furnaces north of the road, huge and rust-streaked, smokestacks still pointed at a sky that has no more use for them. Half the city has watched those ruins go by their whole lives without ever learning what they were. In 1886, a Memphis man named Enoch Ensley laid out a brand new city on Birmingham's western edge, and the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company poured in workers and money until, within 20 years, the Ensley Works ranked among the largest steel plants on Earth. By 1910, the town held 25,000 people, whole neighborhoods of working families who expected the furnaces to outlast everyone. In 1939, a local musician named Erskine Hawkins wrote Tuxedo Junction about the streetcar junction at the center of Ensley. Glenn Miller recorded it, and the song went out across the whole country, dance floors from coast to coast moving to a tune about a Birmingham street corner they had never heard of. Then cheaper foreign steel began eating into the trade. The furnaces went cold in 1975. The last workers were moved to a newer plant in Fairfield by 1980, and by 1984, the site had fallen silent. It is all still there on Birmingport Road, windows gone, floors split, plant life crawling over every surface, a city that helped arm 2 world wars and handed America one of its great songs, left to rust beside an interstate with no one bothering to say what it was. Number 3. Bellefonte in Jackson County. In an open field, a single brick chimney stands entirely alone, the last trace of a county seat that talked itself out of existence, and 2 miles off sits a nuclear plant that swallowed more than $6 billion and never lit a single bulb. Both are still standing, and almost no one puts the two together. Belfonte was the proud seat of Jackson County, incorporated in 1821 with a courthouse and a church, lawyers and doctors, and close to 400 people who believed the town had a long road ahead of it. Then, in 1849, the railroad came asking whether it might run its tracks through town, and the leading men said no, on the grounds that locomotives were loud and filthy and beneath a community of their standing. So the depot went up 3 miles off instead, and the settlement that gathered around it took the name Scottsboro. Within a few years, Scottsboro was the county seat, and Belfonte, stripped of both its courthouse and its trade in one stroke, had nothing left to hold anyone. The Civil War burned off the rest, and by 1880 the town had dropped clean off the census. Today, that lone chimney and an old cemetery with headstones reaching back to 1826 are all that survives. 2 miles away, the Belfonte nuclear generating station sits unfinished and silent. The TVA broke ground in 1974, spent past $6 billion, and halted work in 1988 with the reactors most of the way built, then sold it off in 2016 to a developer who swore he would finish the job and never did. One town that turned its back on the future, one plant that never managed to reach it in the same county, ending the same way. Number 2. Blakeley in Baldwin County. In 1820, this was a bigger place than Mobile, one of the largest towns in the state. A Connecticut man named Josiah Blakeley had founded it in 1814 on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay, on a site that gave large ships a deep natural harbor they could reach even when a sandbar sealed off Mobile's own channel. Within a few years, Blakeley had a bank, 3 hotels, a weekly paper called the Blakeley Sun, and busy shipyards turning out steamboats, and for a moment, it looked like the whole future of the Gulf Coast. Then, yellow fever arrived in the summer of 1822. It came back in 1826 and again in 1828, the dying so heavy the town was burying people in shared graves, none of them yet understanding that the same low delta swamps that gave Blakeley its harbor were breeding the sickness year-round. By the Civil War, the population had crashed from 4,000 to under 100. The Confederacy threw up Fort Blakeley on the old town site, earthworks traced around what was already a corpse of a city, and on the 9th of April in 1865, one of the last real battles of the war was fought there. 16,000 Union troops against 3,500 Confederates dug in among the rotting streets of a town 4 decades dead. Not one of them knew that Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox that very afternoon, and the war was already over. The earthworks remain at historic Blakeley State Park, the shared fever graves lying among the headstones of the Civil War dead, a town that once outgrew Mobile, reduced to a footpath through the trees. Number 1. Old Kahaba in Dallas County. 8 miles west of Selma, where the Cahaba River empties into the Alabama, the Spanish moss hangs so heavy in the old oaks that the afternoon light falls through in long gold columns, and the original street grid still runs through the grass toward the water. This is the most layered story in the whole state. In 1819, Alabama needed a capital, and Governor Bibb secured a free federal land grant at this meeting of the rivers, on ground archaeologists would later confirm had held people for 4,000 years, so that the state's first capital went up directly atop a 30-foot native ceremonial mound. Cahaba was a working capital by 1820 and finished as one by 1826, flooded again and again until the legislature moved the seat to Tuscaloosa. But the town refused to die because the same river access that had chased off the politicians was ideal for cotton, and through the 1840s and the 1850s, it reinvented itself, until by 1860, Dallas County was the fourth wealthiest county per person in the entire United States. Then the war came. The Confederacy seized the town's railroad and tore up the rails. Trade fell apart overnight, and the big cotton warehouse was turned into Castle Morgan, a prison for captured Union soldiers. Built to hold 500, by 1864, it had more than 3,000 men crammed inside, flooding and disease making the conditions unspeakable. When those prisoners were freed in March of 1865 and shipped toward Vicksburg, roughly 1,000 of the survivors boarded a steamboat called the Sultana. 2 days later, her boilers blew apart on the Mississippi, and about 1,800 people died, the worst maritime disaster in American history, most of them men who had only just lived through Cahaba. After the war, the town's white residents followed the county seat to Selma, but formerly enslaved people moved in behind them, buying property, raising churches, and organizing in the abandoned courthouse, until Selma's newspapers were calling Cahaba the Mecca of the radical Republican Party. One of them, Jeremiah Harrelson, had been born into slavery and became the only Alabamian ever to sit in the State House, the State Senate, and the United States Congress. Then Reconstruction ended, the floods kept coming, and by 1900 the last residents were gone, though Kahaba stayed legally a town until 1989, 170 years after it began. In 2019, Ground Radar found 215 unmarked graves, set aside in July of 1819, the very month the first enslaved workers arrived to build the Capitol. The brick columns of the Crocheron mansion still stand over the river, the artesian well still runs, and the old streets still lead down through the moss to the water, a capital and a cotton empire, and a prison and a freedman's town in one patch of ground. Most of its story still waiting under the Alabama soil to be told. If you've got a town you'd like to see covered, leave a comment and I'll add it to my list. And if this is the kind of history that's worth something to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.